and thank you everyone for turning up on this um, Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and I suspect some of you it's already Saturday. So thank you so much for being here.
And thank you, Stuart, for coming. I wanted to wish everyone here a good evening and a big welcome. I'm Andy Schiffer, the Director of Marketing here at Saving Nature. And a big thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. It's going to be a very special conversation. Just a brief background at Saving Nature. As many of you know, our mission is to reconnect the wild. We restore fragmented ecosystems and build wildlife corridors in some of the most threatened regions on Earth. But that vision wouldn't exist without the leadership and science of the man we're here to speak with tonight. Dr. Stuart Pimm is one of the world's most cited environmental scientists, the Doris Duke Professor of Conservation Ecology at Duke University, and the founder of Saving Nature. He's a global leader in the study of biodiversity and extinction, someone whose research has shaped conservation science and whose actions have made a measurable difference on the ground. Tonight, we'll hear about his journey from birdwatching in England to rebuilding forest corridors in South America and Africa. This is a rare opportunity to learn from someone whose work has changed how we understand our planet and how we save it. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stuart Pimm.
Thank you.
Stuart, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming here tonight and talking to us. I wanted to actually start out my first question in the early days. Uh, Before the wards, the books, in the corridors, you were just a kid with a pair of binoculars. Can you take us back to those early days? What first drew you to nature and made you realize this was your life's work?
You know, I was hugely lucky. My parents, who were, working class parents, met hiking in North Derbyshire. They loved being out of doors. Our family holidays were always camping holidays. Um, so from my earliest days, I was out there, in nature. But I got to go bird watching with a school friend when I was 12 years old, and I was absolutely hooked. I looked at birds for the first time through binoculars, and that was it. I was a fanatic bird watcher in no time. And I think what's really special about birds is they tell you so much about nature, about behavior, about ecology, that you very quickly learn, really critical things about the world around you. So, I mean, can you do it with plants? Yes. Can you do it with mammals? Yes. But birds are everywhere. It's hard to imagine a place that doesn't have birds, and so that was just a great start.
Yeah, and it's so cool to see, how that love of birds turned into such a blossoming career protecting them. And you've had,
So,
okay,
so for me, it was very much a matter of going to university to study birds. So I applied to Oxford because that's where the Edward Gray Institute for Ornithology was, and it really took off from there. I was lucky to get an opportunity to travel overland to Afghanistan at the end of my first year. Nearly died. Missed a year of college, I was so sick. Mounted my own expedition to Afghanistan and Kashmir the year later, and it was that a desire to study birds that brought me to the United States to do my PhD here.
and you've had a remarkable academic career since then. And somewhere in that midst, you started saving nature. What led you to start saving nature? What gap did you feel needed to be filled in conservation?
So um, um, I started out in desert birds, and I always thought when I was in my early 20s that the last place that I would ever want to go to was Hawaii. I knew that Hawaii was just a really badly beaten up place. And in one of those events that almost make you believe that there are fairies that go around and sort of wave their magic wands, Pim, you will go to Hawaii. Um, I found myself in the Hawaiian Islands in the late 1970s. And for me, that was a almost a religious conversion because I realized two things. One of them was that I wasn't seeing some things, that there were species there that I ought to see, bird species, and I wasn't seeing them. I was going to be in the field 6 days out of every 8. I thought I'm going to see every bird there is on the big island of Hawaii, and I didn't. And I realized that the reason I wasn't seeing those birds is that they were either extinct or very close to it. But the other part of that was a recognition that I had a moral responsibility. Um, I was already publishing scientific papers in good journals, but I thought, that's not enough. What good is the science unless you do something with it. And it was that feeling that there was a moral responsibility to do something to prevent extinctions that led to my becoming a conservation scientist. So in the early 1980s, a man called Michael Saleh, the man who really founded, conservation science, gave me a call. He said, "You don't know who I am, but we have some friends in common." He had been a PhD student of Paul Ehrlich's, and Paul and Anne Ehrlich were friends. And he said, "I want you to come to a meeting on conservation biology." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, whatever it is, you're doing it, so I want you to come to the meeting." So, very much like Lord Elrond in Lord of the Rings, the half-elven lord, who says, "I was there at the beginning." I was there at the beginning. I was there in the room with a lot of other people. And Michael said, "How many of you think we should found the Society for Conservation Biology?" And I put my hand up. So yeah, it came out of being in Hawaii, recognizing that we were losing species of birds and plants, and that we better do something about that.
Wow. And it led to so many different journeys and paths along your life. And
Indeed.
and it all started from that. I actually never heard that story. That is remarkable. One thing I wanted to touch
Oh,
on,
I want to go back a slide.
let's go back.
That slide at the top left is the research station at La Mesenia in Colombia. And when I first went there about 12 years ago, essentially all of what you can see there was just barren cattle pasture. The research center was completely surrounded by a very, very overgrazed cattle pasture. So all of that area is forest that we at Saving Nature have helped plant. I know you're going to show another slide of that, so you can now go to the next one.
Yeah, correct. And I wanted to allow you the opportunity to kind of fill people that are tuning in. I'm sure we have a lot of very well-informed people here, but for those like me that in the past did not know, what exactly is a wildlife corridor? Why is reconnecting fragmented forests so critical for the survival of species?
So at some stage, we have to talk about where we decide where we're going to work. And I know you've got that on your list of questions.
We could go there first. What
No,
would
no,
you?
we can look at this slide because in a sense it's the end point. Um, when you go to the places where, like Hawaii, that species are on the very brink of extinction, that the front lines of losing biodiversity. Um, what you see is that the landscape is fragmented. That slide at the top is a very good one. You can see that there's little patches of forest, a little bit of forest here, a little bit of forest there, a little bit of forest somewhere else. And you don't have to have a PhD in biology to know that, if you've got a patch of forest over here and it has a couple of males in it and a patch of forest over there it has a couple of females in it, you're not going to get any babies unless you get them together. So a lot of what we needed to do, or what we do at Saving Nature, is that we create corridors. We create ways for which species of animals and plants can fly, crawl, disperse, whatever, to get from one isolated patch to the next. And that turns out to be a really very, very effective way of stopping extinctions. So if you look at that top slide, you would have had populations of birds in the forest fragments to the left and the right. But they don't like crossing that open ground. It's very dangerous for them to cross that open ground. And in that particular case, it's the coastal forest of Brazil. There is an absolutely gorgeous little monkey there called the golden lion tamarin. Golden lion tamarins can't get across that space because they get knocked off by predators. So creating those connections is just vital.
The golden lion tamarin is one of my favorite species I've ever seen a photo of. What predators would they have to be wary of?
Oh, there are foxes and there are cats and things like that, including mountain lions. Being out in an open pasture like that, if you're a small, very conspicuous mammal, is a very dangerous place to be. So we want to give everything the chance to cross in safety.
Wow. Okay. That is really, really interesting to see. With the trees they could swing across. That's great to know. And we talked about this briefly, but you talked about identifying the project sites, and here's two heat maps, and you could maybe explain what those are. But
Yeah.
Saving Nature operates in some of the world's richest and most threatened biodiversity hotspots. How do you identify these project sites? And how do local communities and partners shape your approach?
So that's two quite big questions.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how we know where the species are. Well, it turns out that we now have a huge amount of knowledge about where particularly birds are, but also birds and mammals and amphibians. And that's because there are millions of fanatic bird watchers around the world. I know some of them are listening into this uh, to this um, to this talk. And so we can put all that information together, and so that you find that South America has a lot of species. The Amazon has a lot of species, and you can begin to build a pattern of where those species are. And we're active in both of the two maps. We're active in northern South America. We're also active in the bottom right-hand corner of that left-hand graph, the coastal forests of Brazil. Um, but we're also active in Asia. Um, A lot of people don't realize that the Eastern Himalayas is a very rich area for endemic birds. I know that Professor Trevor Price is listening. He's
Yeah.
a Saving Nature board member and an expert on the birds of the Eastern Himalayas. And then you look at Sumatra, the island at the bottom of that. It's another place where there's just a lot of species. But in the case of the map on the right, it's a different kind of a map. It's a map of where the threatened species are. So the redder the map, those are the front lines. Those are the places where species are at greatest risk. And those are the places where we have to begin to understand what we need to do to prevent extinctions.
That is cool because I actually wasn't sure how to understand these maps till you just told me that. And
Yeah,
that
red means red means more species.
okay, that's fascinating.
I mean, for the fanatic bird watchers amongst us, those are the places you want to go, right? Those are the places where, you're going to see things you've never seen before.
And how do local communities and partners shape your approach?
So, the question is, what happens when you get there? And I've already said that we often find that those areas with the greatest numbers of species are often in habitats that have been sort of massively destroyed. There's been a lot of deforestation. And people do that. People chop the forest down because they're trying to earn a living. They're trying to grow crops or they're trying to graze cattle. So, it's not that these are bad people, but how do we work with local communities? How do we get them to do things that are not so damaging to the environment? It's particularly tragic when you see areas like the northern Andes, or coastal Brazil, or Sumatra, and you see areas where people have chopped the forest down. This is rainforest, it's wet forest, it rains a lot, the hillsides are steep. And the next time it rains hard, the soil washes away. So people are trying to make a living, and the more the forests they clear, the worse it becomes. So one of the things we can do is to reach out to local communities and see what we can do to work with them so that they can get a benefit from protecting, indeed restoring their habitats as opposed to destroying them. And so in the case of Colombia, the slide you showed a couple of slides ago, we have we that actually that's Brazil. So go back one. There we go, top left. So that used to be a cattle pasture. Um, and it was just really overgrazed. The grass was sparse, the cattle were thin and starving. Um, what happens there is that we give money to a local organization, um, Fundación Biodiversity, and they employ basically everybody in the village. The women collect the seeds of the native trees. They and their kids germinate them. And then when the arbolitas, the baby trees, are of a sufficient size, we pack them on the backs of mules, and we take them up the valley. Um, and the men have augers, and they drill down, create a hole, pop a tree in it. And we've done that more than 3 million times at Saving Nature. We've planted over 3 million trees. So it's a way of giving a community a livelihood that involves restoring nature rather than destroying it. And I was in Kenya a couple of weeks ago, talking to a community there that's very worried about the habitat destruction that's taking place. And I asked one of the landowners how much money he made from grazing his cattle. And you know what? I mean, he made a lot less from grazing cattle than he would from planting trees.
Uh,
So that's how we try to do things.
it is fascinating to hear about that. And your trip to Kenya seems like it was kind of a transformative experience. You just got back 2 weeks ago.
I got back 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
And I wanted to say real quick before getting to the next question, you could please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to get to them either right away or towards the end of the call. We're going to open it up to questions. So please feel free. We love questions and Stuart loves questions. So feel free to ask them and we'll try to get to them. Question I had for you, Stuart, is your work uses everything from satellite mapping to camera traps. How is technology reshaping the future of conservation? And is there a tool or breakthrough that's especially exciting for you right now?
There's no doubt that technology has changed dramatically. Um, One of the things that's really important to us is knowing what the landscape looks like, where areas are being deforested, where the forests are being chopped down. Now, 25 years ago, I had one of the most nervous experiences of my entire academic career. I got an hour of time with Dan Golden, who was the administrator of NASA. And he was famous. He wouldn't come into a room for a presentation unless your slides were already up on the screen. And if he got bored, he would just get up and leave. So I had got this hour of his time along with a small group of other conservation scientists. And I said, look, I want the world twice. I want to have two complete global coverages of satellite images, one for 1990 and one for 2000. Um, at that time, if you wanted to buy a satellite image, it cost you $2,000. And if I had an image and you had an image, Andy, I couldn't see yours and I couldn't let you see mine. So it was almost impossible to figure out what was going on. And Goldin said, no, that's not what we do at NASA. We develop new technologies. We don't make our products available for free. I was expecting that question. And I said, look, you can't develop new technologies unless you have a lot of really smart young people um, trying different things. And if it costs $20,000 to test an idea, to having buying expensive imagery, you're not going to develop new ideas. And he bought that. And so now, we have Google Earth and we have easy access
Wow.
to global coverages that came out of that massive data dump that NASA made available to the community 20 odd years ago. So the really big advance is that we now have a really good idea of what's going on. So
Recording in progress.
that's been really important. Um, Drones, you can see there's a drone there. That allows us to photograph the restorations that we're doing in very high resolution. I mean, we now, you can see individual leaves on the trees with a drone. But the other, amazing thing is this thing, your smartphone. And two things. There I am in the forest of eastern Kenya in an area called the Taita Hills, which is losing its forest very fast. And I'm using this device which could have almost been designed to be a biodiversity monitoring tool. I go into eBird and I record which birds I see. But the other thing that I'm really proud of is, okay, that's just birds. What about butterflies? What about all the other things? Um, and when Scott Lowry was a graduate student in my office, we said, look, we need to have a tool to develop, you know, a survey tool for people who are interested in birds and not just birds, but frogs and butterflies and the whole thing. And Scott went on with those ideas that were conceived in my lab to found iNaturalist. It was a huge breakthrough after 8 months that iNaturalist got 1 million observations. Um, last time I talked to Scott a few weeks ago, he was getting 6 million observations per
Wow.
month. So we're really able to map out where everything is, not just birds, but other groups too. And that's made a huge difference. And then finally, some species are just very shy. And so we have camera traps and we put camera traps out. And we got some fantastic news just a couple of days ago. One of the projects that we did in Brazil required a huge effort, not just for us to be able to raise the money to buy the land for our partner in Brazil, the Golden Lion Tamarin Association, but we needed to persuade the local road company to build a habitat bridge across the road. So we wanted to connect an isolated fragment of forest in a reserve called Poço dos Antes. It means the place of the tapirs. Um, but to connect it to forest elsewhere, we had to create a habitat bridge. So after a lot of persuasion, a lot of keeping feet to the fire, our partners got the road company to build a habitat bridge. And just the other day, um, a mountain lion crossed the bridge. So they have a camera trap, rather like the one you see there at the bottom right. Um, and we got an image of a mountain lion crossing this road on this habitat bridge. Now, habitat bridges are relatively common in the US. I know there's some big ones now in Los Angeles, but for a habitat bridge in Brazil, that was really a big deal, and it took a lot of effort. And so we know about things like that because we have these camera traps taking pictures of them.
That is amazing. And for those that don't know, what's the significance of a mountain lion crossing a bridge versus, like a smaller animal that's not a predator?
Well, in this particular case, we do because when you lose top predators like mountain lions from a habitat fragment, um, you get middle-sized predators becoming very common. Mountain lions and jaguars and other big predators rule. They are the bosses. And if you've got them in your fragment, they keep down these middle-sized predators. Um, and one of them in Brazil is this very, very aggressive, mean animal called Tyra. Um, and Tyras, I'm suppose their mothers love them, but Tyras are a really sort of fierce, sort of stoat-like predator. And when you have too many Tyras, they kill a lot of tamarins. So getting the mountain lions back into the fragments is really important because they keep the Tyra numbers down, and that means the mountain lions can do You can do you can do more more conservation as a consequence. So all of that comes from our ability to sort of um, monitor things. And all of these technologies are new. I mean, iNaturalist is only a few years old. Cell phones are pretty new. Um, I mean, there was a time when we couldn't really use camera traps effectively because we they needed to be they need to have film in them, and that meant that you only got 36 shots before you had to change the film. So within 20 years, the technology for studying biodiversity has changed dramatically, and at Saving Nature, we're really really on top of that.
Does anyone else here use eBird? I'm sure a lot of you do, or iNaturalist, or is there another favorite app you guys like to use? You could comment that so we can all learn and get more in touch with nature. I'm sure.
Well, I mean, I really, I mean, I have become a fanatic eBirder, because I know the data is so important. That they are very much at the center of what we do. For those who are interested in the technical details of this, Saving Nature has a program called birdrangemapper.com, where we use those data and data on elevation and habitat to map out where we think species are, and we use that tool, very energetically to decide how we're going to allocate our funds. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be traveling to Colombia, and I noticed that Trevor Price has just prodded me to say that not only can we identify our birds and
Info.
put them in into the computer, but there's now a program called Merlin, um, that identifies their songs. So I can go out into the field and I can hold my cell phone up and it'll tell me what's singing, which is really good for me because I've never been very good about songs. So there's really good stuff that enables us um, to do that.
Jungle Dragon 2. I haven't actually heard of that one, but I'll check that out later, James. We had a question for you, Stuart, looping back to talking about the community from Joel Cohen. How do you feel the surrounding communities understand or not the value of conservation?
Well, people somehow have a view that, people just want to go out and destroy nature because they're trying to make a living. Uh, People do destroy nature because they want to make a living. But people who live in the places we work are much more connected to nature than we are. Um, they live surrounded by it. If there are predators, big predators out there, those predators might take their sheep or their goats or their cattle or their chickens. Um, they may be collecting plants, medicinal plants, herbs, whatever from the forest for food or medicine. And if they destroy the forest and the forest washes away, the pasture washes away in a rainstorm, they're the people um, that suffer. So communities where we work are much more connected to the world around them. And so, it's important for us to work out what we can do to engage those local communities. And one of the things that was fundamental to our founding Saving Nature is that we wanted to empower local groups. So, the entirety of Saving Nature is pretty much on this call. I know that our wonderful executive director, Erin Willigan, is listening in. And Erin's our one senior staff person. You are the other staff person, and we have several volunteer members of the board. Um, I wanted deliberately for us to keep us small and nimble, and for the money that we raise to go to the local communities. It's got to be the local communities that make the decision. Um, I don't think you could do effective conservation, sitting in a very expensive office building inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway. You've got to get out there and help the local people. So it's always been a part of our founding ethic to empower the local communities, to empower the people who are living there. So in all the places we work, the that our partners are people who either live in the community year round or live in the community most of the year round. And I know you've talked to people like Rudy Putra in Sumatra, um, and you've got other people lined up for this for these uh, for these events. These are people who are there living in the forest day by day, and they know about the lives of the people there. They know their loves, their fears, their concerns, what worries them, and I think it's vital to have that kind of connection.
Thank you. That I hope that I'm sure that answered the question. Another quick question that we have regarding integration of species and top predators from Jonathan Friedman asked, did a similar thing happen to what happened when the mountain lion wasn't around and that medium species was in charge? I forgot the name, the one that you said.
Ira,
Yeah. Uh, did that happen in Yellowstone when the wolves were reintroduced?
um, uh, I don't know Yellowstone well, but I think so. I think that the story in Yellowstone is that once the wolves were taken out, there was a plague of elk and other animals that simply took off because they had no control. Um, so yeah, it was essential to restore the vegetation to control the elk, and the best way of controlling elk is to have wolves and mountain lions and bears and things. I mean, those kind of ecological cascades are increasingly well understood. But that's another reason why we have to make sure that everywhere has all the pieces. And so if you fragment a landscape, it's not those fragments are not going to be big enough to support the top predators, and that's why you have to build these habitat corridors, which is what we do.
On that note, and by the way, everyone, feel free to keep asking questions. We're gonna try to get to them either now or at the end. So if I didn't ask your question yet, I will. Uh, Going to the next slide, I wanted to get into actually a quote you said that extinction is both scientifically fascinating and morally imperative to address. Can you walk us through how your research has revealed just how fast species are disappearing and what that tells us about the urgency of this moment?
So for a long time, people were talking about, how many species were going extinct per day. And the problem with that is we don't really know. And there was there was a problem because if you found yourself in front of a congressional committee, as some of the leaders of the big conservation groups did, they would get up and say, oh, 30 species are becoming extinct per day. And you get some politicians who would say, well, name them, right? And they couldn't. And they couldn't name them because that number was based on some estimate of there being, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 million species that we didn't have names for. So with colleagues, we decided we needed to come up with a better measure, a better way of describing what's going on. And so we talk about extinction rates. Now, might seem a bit technical, but the reality is that we think about death rates all the time. For humans in North America, a typical annual death rate is that 8 million people die per mil. Sorry, 8,000 people die per million people per year. Okay, 8,000 deaths per million people per year. During COVID, it was 9,500. So that's what COVID did. So we can talk about death rates. We can talk about our own death rates. So what my colleagues and I came up with was a death rate for species. And we said, look, species are dying off at 500 extinctions per million species per year. That number is something that we can very carefully document for birds and mammals and amphibians and now flowering plants, reptiles. We're beginning to work out these extinction rates group by group by group. And so if some politician says, Professor Pimm, okay, you say birds are going extinct at the rate of 200 extinctions per million species per year, I can give them the catalog. I can name names. So dealing with extinction rates may seem a bit technical, but it's vital that we can defend the numbers that we're coming up with. And so when Al Gore, in An Inconvenient Truth, talks about species going extinct 1,000 times faster than they should, he's quoting our work. And it's a measure that we can quantify. It's a measure that stands up to scientific scrutiny. The species that you're looking at here, are rhinos, which we know are threatened with extinction. And this beautiful little animal at the bottom of the picture is called an olingito, which was discovered very recently in a museum. People looked at the skins and realized that there was a mammal there that didn't have a proper name. And as soon as we heard that, we went out into the forest in our project in Colombia, and there was the Olingito. So this is a place where you can see
Wow.
the absolutely splendid little animal.
Wow. That I didn't know that story. And I didn't know you were cited in Inconvenient Truth. What do you think of that movie when you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, he does he does a good job of explaining some very difficult science. And obviously I was very happy that he quoted my science. I mean, I wish he'd have said, and my good friend Stuart Pimm says, but you take publicity for your science any way you can get it.
Jack Steingrove says, "We miss you in the Florida Keys. Apps for marine life are wide-ranging. Daniel Pauly's fish space is excellent, and the deep sea world has been made accessible by ROVs and live streaming imagery. You also mentioned the importance of corridors in terrestrial conservation efforts. The Eastern Tropical Pacific is a classic example, the corridor between Cocos Island and Galapagos."
Yep. So I miss you too, Jack. I'm no longer working in the Everglades, and but yeah, I mean, I have a very good friend in England called Callan Roberts, who, in addition to being an outstanding uh, outstanding marine ecologist, um, Jack is holding up a picture of Paul Ehrlich's book. I have one almost within reach. It's right over there. Um, the same thing applies to the marine world. That there's Callum Roberts' work has shown that there are extinctions in the sea. They're happening in much the same way as they do on land. They're happening in places where the marine biodiversity hotspots. And it's really important to create corridors so species can keep marine species can disperse. In the Pacific, the Ecuadorian government has created a big protected area, no-take area around the Galapagos. But there are some islands to little cluster of small islands to the northeast, and protecting that corridor so that the predators in particular can disperse from the Cocos Islands to the Galapagos is just really hugely important.
Hal Caswell says there's an interesting. You're smiling. I feel like you know everyone on this call well, Stuart. There's an interesting aspect of Seoul's initiative about conservation biology in the 80s, relative to how conservation was viewed in the 1960s. My father taught courses in it then, and my memory of the text was that the emphasis was on conservation and agriculture, soil erosion, fire prevention and
Yep.
wildlife resources, avoiding overharvest, maintaining populations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Seoul really wanted to bring ecology, population, biology, genetics, etc. into conservation. It seems to me to inform a lot of what saving nature does.
Yes. Michael's name is pronounced Soleil. It's got an
Oh,
accent.
I
That
knew I
right?
did something wrong there.
Um,
Thank you.
it was it was
You
it
could
was
explain what that is too.
Michael was the man who invited many of us to this meeting in Michigan in the early 80s. That's the one where he said, I want you to come to a meeting on conservation. And I said, what's that? The thing is that Michael had an incredible vision about the breadth of what conservation science should be. And I think we all owe him an enormous thank you for that kind of leadership. He realized that you needed genetics and you needed population biology, you needed ecosystem biology. He realized that you had to understand the economics, you had to understand the social science, um, and you had to understand the ethical and spiritual dimensions of that. And Mike's influence was enormous because he had that incredible breadth of knowledge.
And I wanted to get uh, some hope after talking about extinction. Just because I personally I get sad when I think about it, but I wanted to hear your vision for saving nature in the next decade and look ahead and get some hope in some ways we could help out. So, what's your vision for saving nature in the next decade?
So, this is a question I get every time I talk to journalists, and particularly at the present time when the Endangered Species Act is under great threat. And many of us are working very hard to try and fight back against demolishing the Endangered Species Act. People say, Professor Pym, how do you get up in the morning? I mean, how do you maintain enthusiasm when the world is so bad? And the answer is I do that because there's so much we can do. Um, One of the things that I've learned in the 15 years, 20 years that saving nature is being in existence is that a lot of things we can do. It's enormously rewarding planting a tree. Saving nature is now planted 3 million plus. There's a lot of things that we can do to restore nature. Um, there's a lot of things that we can do to make smart choices, um, to help documenting biodiversity with our app of contributing to Fishbase, to iNaturalist, to eBird, so we understand the distributions of species better. Um, and Lots of good examples of that. And then, the fact that we can learn to live more gently on the landscape. Do we need to drive so much? Do we need to eat as much meat as we do? If we eat fish, are we eating sustainably harvested fish? There's an app for looking at whether the fish are sustainably harvested or not. Um, without really dramatically changing our lifestyles, there's a lot of very practical things we can do.
That that's good to know. I'm sure everyone here would want to know all your tips to live as eco-friendly as possible. I just wanted to say that's the end of my direct questions to you, and to thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'm still going to answer people's questions in the chat, and anyone that I didn't get to, will get to if you're up for it, Stuart.
I am. I noticed one that's just come in from James Aronson, which is to talk about ecological restoration. That's what we do at Saving Nature. There's no question about that. And the reason for that is I realize that um, we've left habitats behind, but we've left them in a bad shape. And I think one of the most cost-effective things that we can do for conservation is to begin to restore habitats. And that's very much what we do at Saving Nature. We believe that local communities can play a vitally important role by restoring their landscapes. We we damaged a lot of the world. We've destroyed an area of rainforest that's almost the size of the continental US. What we're going to do about it? Well, there are many places where we can begin to plant trees on what is currently bad land, degraded land, and we can begin to bring those forests back.
Why don't we go to Jim Fredericks? Are there some interesting examples of unintentional ecology conservation projects?
I think, the thing about, I mean, once upon a time, I was an ecologist. Um, and obviously, I felt that that alone was inadequate. It wasn't that I wasn't successful at doing ecology, but I wanted to do ecology that made a difference. And I think the remarkable thing is that as we begin to realize that species are going extinct, we force ourselves to put our, ecology insights to practice. We take the ecology that we know and we do something very practical with them. Um, that may be restoration. Restoration is an amazing ecology experiment. Creating corridors like we do, building corridors, really tests the ideas of whether we know how to do ecology. So that, we've long said if you fragment habitats, you'll lose species. We're now reconnecting habitats and the species are coming back. And that tells us we're actually knowing, we know what we're doing. And that I find is very exciting.
We have another question from David Blinken. He says, there's so much disconnect communicating what orgs like Saving Nature does. How can how can we get the message out about the importance of your work?
I think we do that well. I'd like to see us do it more of it. But I think if you go to our website, you'll see lots of photographs of areas that were once, not only deforested, but are pretty miserable places without their trees, hillsides eroding away. And so you'll find a lot of images there of, this used to be a very poor cattle pasture. Now it's growing trees. Um, and incidentally, it's growing trees and generating an income stream from carbon credits that is worth more than the landowner got from growing cattle. So I hope you will look at our website and you look at the before and after photographs. And I mean, that's another reason why I get up in the morning because we really now can begin to see very, very practical solutions.
Dale Steele says, many thanks for sharing these stories and insights. Many memories of early days with SCB, etc. And Edward uh, says, so inspiring. Thank you, Stuart and team, for all your dedication to science, nature, and restoration. I actually wanted to go up quickly to a question Andrew Luke, and apologies if I mispronounce anyone's name, said at the beginning, asking, how do I decide which are the most effective conservation NGOs to donate to? I'm not sure tools like Charity Navigator are adequate for that purpose.
I think that's a great question. And obviously, I have a
Saving nature aside, obviously.
saving nature. Um, but I think the reality is, I mean, we're very happy that we get a great credit rating from Charity Navigator. I think that's very important. It means that as a team, we're doing things, the right way. But I think you then have to ask, what are you getting for your money? How do you know um, where my money is going? How can I be sure that my money is going to something that matters? And all I can say is if you give to us, we can say, aha, you bought that piece of land. And in a year's time, it'll have some little trees on it, and in 5 years' time, it'll have some bushes, and in 10 years' time, it'll have some trees. I think the lesson there is whatever you give to, you ask yourself, is the organization going to carefully document where my money is going? Are you getting your money's worth? And we are very aggressive at documenting where the money goes. Our We're very fortunate. We have a small number of wonderful foundations that keep our operations going, so that essentially all the money that people give us goes to our partners buying land and planting trees. So whatever conservation group you give to, I think it's reasonable to ask, what are you getting for the money? Can I see where my money's going? And if the answer to that is no, then you know, you better think somewhere else. So somebody's asking, thanks for asking where my donation is going. I mean, Andrew, it's quite possible that we can tell you exactly where your money is going, and some people really want to have that particular answer, and generally we can provide it. I
Stuart,
say generally because sometimes, somebody gives you $100, it might be part of a package that costs $2,000. But I mean, you can go to our maps and you can see where we're buying land, and you can see on Google Earth where the trees are that we're planting.
Jack Steingrove says, although not familiar with the term unintentional ecological experiments, I've considered the marine environments between Florida, Bahamas in the north and Cuba in the south, a demilitarized zone, where the sea life has flourished, much like the DMZ between North and South Korea,
Yeah.
where
Just
the
over just over a year and a half ago, I was in the DMZ in South Korea, and yeah, very, very interesting place that wildlife has done really quite well there simply because people have left it alone.
well, let's see. James has a question for you. You mentioned carbon credit markets. Are they reviving, and will we ever see biodiversity credit markets as per Alexandri and Atelier et al. 2024 in Nature?
Um, we're Our project in Colombia in the Western Andes is we have a $2 million grant for carbon credits. So yes, we are trading carbon, and that money goes to buy land and for the local community to plant trees. So carbon credits are not easy. We're incredibly lucky to have an extraordinary talent in the form of Erin Willigan, who is our executive director. Erin started out her bachelor's degree as a scientist, and then did an MBA at Harvard, and then came and did a master's in conservation with Columbia University, where I was. We're very, very lucky that we have somebody with Erin's business acumen. But she is now doing a fantastic job of getting our partners to have carbon credits for the trees that we plant. Um, Biodiversity credits is interesting, and I could talk forever about that. We're not selling biodiversity credits, even though we're doing a huge amount of biodiversity conservation, largely because it just seems like a lot of extra work, a huge amount of extra paperwork for not much extra benefit. Um, if we can plant trees, if we can sell carbon for $25 a ton, we can do most of what we need to do without having to sell the biodiversity credits in addition. Now, if anyone wants to talk to us about that, I'd be happy to do it. But we have not yet found a way of making biodiversity credits worth the incredible extra work that we have to do.
Leslie says, fantastic conversation. Thank you all. And Andrew Luke says, I'm skeptical of these credit markets.
I think he's right to be skeptical. That there's a lot of carbon financing that's been very sketchy, and we work very hard to make sure that ours is transparent.
If anyone doesn't have any more questions at the time or thinks of them later, please emailing me and we'll get those answered. Stuart, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your vision with us tonight. Your work has shaped the future of conservation. Oh, wait, we got another question right here. And if you guys need to go, that's totally fine. This is all recorded. We just want to get as many questions answered as possible. From Jim, do you read much science fiction or have a
Yes,
favorite author?
absolutely. I should tell you that I am a rabid Star Trek fan. I mean, the next generation, Jean-Luc Picard. And the reason for that is it's an optimistic view of the future. All the scientists I know are Star Trek fans, because that's what we hope the future will be. And I believe that. I believe that we're gonna sort this out, and Jean-Luc Picard will be one of my descendants in 300 years' time. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Stuart. We all appreciate the work you've done and you've shown us with your science, and we want to thank you so much. To everyone listening, if you'd like to support this work, scan the QR code or reach out to us directly. Every acre restored, every forest reconnected, every species protected, it all starts with action. This is recorded and will be later posted and shared on YouTube as well as Spotify. Thank you for being with us. And Stuart, thank you for leading the way.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us.
Take care, everyone.